I still remember the way the steam curled off that bowl of chicken soup. Funny, isn't it? Out of everything that happened afterward, the black SUVs, the whispered names, the men who lowered their eyes when he walked into a room, that was the image my mind refused to let go. The soup smelled like rosemary and cracked black pepper. My hands were shaking so badly from the cold that I wrapped both of them around the bowl before I remembered it wasn't mine anymore. Outside, January rain washed the sidewalk silver. Our old diner sat on the corner of an Italian neighborhood where everyone seemed to know everyone, except me. I was just the night shift waitress. The girl who refilled coffee, smiled through sore feet, and disappeared before sunrise. She had been standing across the street for almost 20 minutes. An elderly woman. Small. Elegant without trying to be. Her gray coat was too thin for the weather, and she kept looking through the fogged front window, not at the people, but at the food. Hungry recognizes hungry. You don't have to say a word. I looked down at the folded bills in my apron. Just enough for one meal before I caught the last bus home. My stomach tightened so hard it almost hurt. Then I picked up the bowl anyway. I ordered too much, I lied, carrying it to her booth after she'd finally stepped inside. Would you help me finish it? She looked at me for a long moment. Not embarrassed. Not suspicious. Just sad. I believe, she said softly, you're giving me your dinner. Heat rushed into my face. I'll survive one night. She smiled then. The kind of smile that made every wrinkle look earned. Before I could stop her, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Kindness, she whispered, always finds its way home. She ate slowly. I drank water and pretended I wasn't hungry. When the check came, I slipped my last few bills beneath it and wrote across the receipt with the diner's blue pen. Already paid. Enjoy your meal. She folded the receipt carefully into her purse as though it mattered. I thought I'd never see her again. By the time my shift ended, the rain had turned into sleet. I pulled my coat tighter, walked home with an empty stomach, and convinced myself nobody had noticed what I'd done. The next morning, before the diner even unlocked its front door, 3 black SUVs rolled silently beneath the faded neon sign. Men in dark coats stepped out first. Then the man everyone else instinctively made room for. He didn't look at the building. He looked straight at me. And somehow, he already knew my name. My first thought wasn't that he wanted to thank me. It was that I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. The man in the charcoal coat stood beside the lead SUV with the kind of stillness that made everyone else nervous. Nobody rushed him. Nobody spoke unless he looked at them first. Even from half a block away, I could feel the street changing around him. The cook, Miguel, stopped unlocking the back door. Our hostess quietly lowered the metal sign she'd been carrying. Someone whispered, "That's DeLuca." The name meant very little to me. The silence that followed it meant everything. One of the men beside him caught my eye. Emily Carter? I couldn't make my feet move. For one impossible second, all I could think about was that bowl of soup. Had I broken some rule? Had I embarrassed his family? Was yesterday's kindness about to cost me the only job keeping my life together? I forced myself to nod. I'm Emily. The man didn't threaten me. He simply said, Mr. DeLuca would like to speak with you after you clock in. After. Not now. Not outside. That should have made me feel better. Instead it somehow made me more afraid. By the time I reached the break room, my phone buzzed with a reminder I'd been trying to ignore for 3 days. Rent overdue. Final notice. I locked the screen before I could read the rest. A second notification followed. My brother Ben. Morning. Don't forget I have my appointment this afternoon. I smiled despite myself. Ben always pretended everything was fine, even when it wasn't. His insulin wasn't cheap, and neither of us ever admitted how often we stretched prescriptions a little longer than the doctor wanted. Missing one paycheck didn't just mean late rent. It meant deciding which bill survived the month. I tied my faded apron around my waist and walked into the dining room. The smell of bacon, coffee, and fresh biscuits usually settled my nerves. Not today. Every few minutes I caught someone glancing toward the windows. The black SUVs hadn't moved. Neither had the men. Mr. Nolan, our manager, marched out of his office carrying a clipboard. His smile disappeared the moment he saw the vehicles. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. I don't know. They asked for you. I've never met them." His eyes narrowed as though that answer disappointed him. "Well, figure it out before it becomes my problem." He walked away without waiting for a response. That was his favorite trick. Make every disaster feel borrowed from someone else's life. I picked up a coffee pot and started my section. Table 4 liked extra cream before they asked. The retired teacher in booth 2 preferred wheat toast cut diagonally because arthritis made square pieces harder to hold. Mr. Jenkins always ordered decaf but forgot and asked for regular. Little things. Most people never noticed them. I always did. Maybe that was what years of serving strangers taught you. If you paid attention, people usually told you exactly who they were without saying much at all. When I glanced outside again, I realized something that tightened every muscle in my body. The man everyone called Mr. DeLuca wasn't watching the diner anymore. He was watching me. Then he opened the front door himself. The little bell above the diner's front door gave its usual cheerful ring. Nobody smiled. Conversation stopped so completely that I heard the soft hiss of bacon on the grill. Mr. DeLuca stepped inside without hurry, rainwater glistening on the shoulders of his dark overcoat. 3 men followed, but they spread out naturally instead of crowding him. They didn't need to announce who they worked for. The room already knew. Power didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived so quietly that everyone else lowered their own voices. He removed his leather gloves and looked around the diner once before his eyes settled on me. "Emily Carter?" My throat tightened. "Yes, sir." His expression didn't change. "May I have a few minutes of your time?" Not asterisk come here. Asterisk not asterisk sit down. Asterisk a request. That unsettled me even more. Mr. Nolan hurried across the dining room with a smile that looked painfully rehearsed. "Mr. DeLuca, welcome. If we'd known you were coming, we could have reserved our private room. There won't be any need." His voice was calm. "I'd like to speak with your waitress." "Our waitress?" Nolan forced a laugh. "I'm sure whatever this is, I can answer for my staff." "I didn't ask for you." The words weren't loud. They landed anyway. Mr. Nolan stepped back, still smiling, but his fingers tightened around the clipboard until his knuckles turned white. I noticed because I always noticed hands. Hands told the truth before faces did. Mr. DeLuca motioned toward an empty booth by the front window. "Please." I glanced at Nolan. He gave the smallest nod. The kind that wasn't permission. It was warning. I walked over carefully, aware that every customer in the diner was pretending not to watch us. Mr. DeLuca remained standing until I sat down. Only then did he take the opposite seat. For a long second, he simply studied me. Not my face. My hands. The tiny burn near my wrist from yesterday's coffee pot. The ink stain still clinging to my thumb from writing receipts. The loose thread hanging from the cuff of my uniform. He noticed details the way detectives probably did. It made me suddenly aware of every imperfection I carried. Finally he asked one question. "Why did you feed my mother?" The words emptied the air from my lungs. The elderly woman. The soup. Her smile. I stared at him. I didn't know who she was. I know. I wasn't trying to get anything. I know. Then, why are you here? His eyes shifted briefly toward the front counter. Because my mother has never accepted charity. Confusion washed over me. I didn't give her charity. No. I shared my dinner. For the first time, something softened behind his steady expression. Only slightly. As though that answer mattered more than he'd expected. Then he reached inside his coat. Every muscle in my body tightened. Instead of a weapon, he placed a folded guest receipt on the table between us. Mine. The blue ink was unmistakable. Already paid. Enjoy your meal. I'd like you to tell me exactly what happened last night, he said quietly. Before I could answer, Mr. Nolan appeared beside our booth carrying 2 cups of coffee neither of us had ordered. His smile returned too quickly. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, setting the cups down. But I think there may have been a misunderstanding about that meal. Mr. DeLuca didn't look at the coffee. He looked at the manager. And for the first time since he'd walked into the diner, the room felt genuinely dangerous. Mr. Nolan laughed softly, the kind of laugh meant to make everyone else feel foolish before they had a chance to speak. I can clear this up in 30 seconds, he said, folding his hands in front of him. Emily's a hard-working girl, but sometimes our younger staff try to be generous with food that doesn't belong to them. Every pair of eyes in the diner drifted toward me. The warmth from my coffee disappeared. I looked down at the receipt between Matteo DeLuca and me. The blue ink suddenly seemed very small. I didn't give away restaurant food, I said quietly. Nolan answered before Matteo could. You don't need to protect yourself. Just admit you made a mistake. I paid for that meal. His smile widened. With what money? The question landed harder than if he'd shouted. A few customers shifted uncomfortably. One of the waitresses lowered her head. They all knew how little we earned. That was exactly why he'd asked it. Because poverty sounds unbelievable when someone claims they gave something away. I felt my face growing warm, but I refused to look away. I skipped my own dinner. Nolan sighed dramatically. Emily. I did. You're under a lot of stress. I bought the soup. Think carefully. His voice grew gentler. Almost fatherly. If inventory comes up short, someone has to answer for it. There it was. Not a threat. An invitation to surrender. I knew that tone. I'd heard it every time a tip jar came up light. Every time silverware disappeared. Every time someone needed an easy explanation. I had always been the easiest explanation. Matteo hadn't said a single word. He simply watched us. His fingers rested beside the folded receipt. Completely still. I'll apologize for my mistakes, I heard myself say. The room became even quieter. But I won't confess to someone else's. For the first time, Nolan's smile cracked. You understand who you're speaking in front of? I do. And you're calling your manager a liar? No. I swallowed. I'm saying I'm telling the truth. The difference mattered. At least to me. Nolan leaned toward Matteo. I'm sorry you've been dragged into this. She's had financial problems lately. Rent issues. Sick family member. People get desperate. Every word was true. Every conclusion was false. I hated how easily the two could be confused. Matteo finally spoke. When did you learn about her rent? Nolan blinked. What? You mentioned it. I try to know what's happening with my employees. Matteo nodded once. Nothing more. But I noticed his eyes move, not toward Nolan's face, but toward his hands. The clipboard had disappeared. Instead, his fingers were rubbing against each other over and over. Like someone trying to wipe away invisible dust. I'd seen that motion before. Customers did it when they were about to complain. Ben did it before difficult doctor appointments. People touched their hands when their thoughts had nowhere else to go. Matteo had noticed it too. He wasn't watching the words. He was watching what escaped between them. He looked back at me. What happened after your shift ended? The question surprised both Nolan and me. I cleaned my section. What time? A little after 11:30. You locked up? No, sir. I took the last bus home. You went straight home? Yes. Nolan interrupted quickly. With respect, I don't see how any of this relates to. Mateo lifted one hand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look at him. The interruption ended itself. The entire diner seemed to breathe more carefully. Mateo's attention returned to me. When you paid for the meal? Yes. Did anyone see you? I searched my memory. Steam. Rain. The old woman smiling. The blue pen. The register. Then something small surfaced. Not dramatic. Just ordinary. I think. I said slowly. I asked Lily to watch table 6 while I walked to the register. Lily? Mateo asked. Our morning server. She'd come in early for inventory. Nolan answered immediately. She wasn't paying attention. She couldn't possibly remember something that minor. His answer came too fast. Too certain. I looked at him. I hadn't asked whether Lily remembered. Neither had Mateo. For the first time since this conversation began, a knot formed low in my stomach. Mateo noticed it before I said a word. His gaze shifted from my face to Nolan's. Then, in the same calm voice he'd used since walking through the door, he said, I think we're finished discussing assumptions. He slid the handwritten receipt into the inside pocket of his coat. Now I'd like to see yesterday's register records. The words settled over the diner like a heavy winter coat. I'd like to see yesterday's register records. Nobody moved. The coffee on nearby tables grew cold while customers pretended to study their menus. Even the grill seemed quieter. Mr. Nolan recovered first. Of course, he said with another practiced smile. If that's what you need. He turned toward the office. I'll get them. I'll come with you. Mateo's voice was calm. Nolan hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second before forcing another smile. There isn't much room back there. I'm not worried. The manager swallowed. Very well. They disappeared through the office door, leaving me standing beside the booth with every eye in the restaurant drifting toward me. Nobody spoke. Not until Lily quietly walked over carrying an empty coffee pot. She leaned close enough that only I could hear. You really bought that lady dinner? I did. You should have eaten. I know. She looked toward the office. I saw you pay. My head lifted. You did? I wasn't trying to watch. She shrugged. You asked me to cover table 6, remember? I thought you were grabbing extra napkins. Relief washed through me so suddenly my knees almost weakened. Why didn't you say something? Her expression fell. Mr. Nolan never asks questions because he wants answers. I understood exactly what she meant. People heard more than they admitted inside restaurants. They simply learned which truths kept their jobs. The office door opened again. Mr. Nolan returned carrying a thick register binder. Mateo followed a step behind without saying a word. The binder landed on the counter with a dull thud. There, Nolan announced confidently. Every transaction from yesterday. Mateo looked at me instead of opening it. You remember the time? I closed my eyes. Not because I was guessing. Because I could still see it. The lunch crowd had been gone for hours. The dinner rush was over. The pie display had only one slice of apple left. Miguel was mopping near the kitchen doors. The old jukebox started playing Johnny Cash. Outside, the rain had just begun. I opened my eyes. It was 8:47. Nolan laughed. You expect us to believe you remember a receipt down to the minute? No. I remember the room. I pointed toward the windows. The couple by the front window left right before she came in. I looked toward booth 3. The retired teacher had switched from coffee to hot tea because his hands were hurting. Then toward the counter. A delivery driver spilled cream there. Finally I looked back at Mateo. I remember writing the receipt after the kitchen clock changed from 8:46 to 8:47. Silence. Real silence. Not fear. Thinking. Mateo slowly opened the register binder. His finger moved down one column before stopping. He turned the book toward me. Which one? I scanned the page only once. There. I touched a single line. Chicken soup. 1 coffee. Paid in cash. Nolan leaned forward immediately. Anyone could guess that. I didn't guess. No. The coffee wasn't for her. He frowned. What? The soup was. I bought the coffee for myself because refills were free. I smiled faintly despite the tension. I needed something warm after giving away dinner. A few customers exchanged uncertain glances. Lily looked from the receipt book to me with widened eyes. Mateo didn't smile. But something changed. He no longer questioned whether I remembered. Now he seemed interested in how I remembered. You notice details, he said quietly. I notice people. Explain. I remember orders because people repeat habits. I pointed toward Mr. Jenkins, who had been frozen halfway through buttering his toast. He always asks for regular coffee after ordering decaf. The older man blinked. I actually do. A nervous chuckle spread through part of the diner. The tension eased for only a heartbeat. Then I continued. I remember birthdays, allergies, wedding anniversaries, who needs extra napkins before asking, whose arthritis is worse when it rains. I looked down at my worn apron. When you serve people long enough, you stop memorizing meals. You memorize lives. The words escaped before I could stop them. Nobody spoke. Even Nolan seemed unsure how to answer that. Mateo closed the binder gently. His eyes rested on me with a kind of quiet respect that hadn't been there before. Then they shifted to the office door. Yesterday's register balances match, he said. But one thing doesn't. Mr. Nolan's shoulders stiffened. Mateo's voice remained almost conversational. I'd like to see your payroll records next. The word payroll changed the room. Not loudly. Just enough. Mr. Nolan's confident posture sagged for the first time since Mateo had walked through the door. His smile remained, but it no longer reached his eyes. I'm not sure why payroll would have anything to do with yesterday's dinner. Mateo rested one hand on the register binder. I'm trying to understand your business. Our accountant handles payroll. I'm asking you. The manager laughed again, thinner this time. Our employees are paid every Friday. Nothing unusual. I felt my pulse quicken. Payroll had never crossed my mind. I'd been so focused on proving I hadn't stolen that bowl of soup that I hadn't noticed where Mateo's questions were leading. He wasn't chasing my story anymore. He was following the places where Mr. Nolan seemed least comfortable. The office door stood half open. Inside, I could see metal filing cabinets, stacks of invoices, and a payroll folder sitting slightly crooked on the desk. Mr. Nolan noticed my eyes drift toward it and stepped sideways without thinking. Blocking it. The movement lasted only a second. But it was enough. Mateo saw it too. So, he said evenly, let's take a look. I really don't think that's appropriate. Why not? Those records are confidential. Then we can review only the employees who choose to let us. His voice never rose. Neither did his heartbeat, as far as I could tell. Mine certainly had. The manager looked around the diner, searching for support. No one volunteered. Miguel quietly stopped wiping the grill. Lily folded her hands together. Even the regular customers remained in their booths, pretending to eat while listening to every word. Mr. Nolan cleared his throat. I'm responsible for protecting my staff. A sentence I'd heard before. Usually right before something unfair happened. Without meaning to, I spoke. Our paychecks aren't always the same. Every head turned toward me. Nolan's expression hardened. Emily. I work almost the same hours every week. I looked at Mateo instead. Sometimes my check is $20 lower. Sometimes 40. I always assume I counted my tips wrong. Miguel slowly set down the towel in his hand. It happens to me too. Lily looked startled. I thought it was just because I was new. Neither of them sounded angry. Only confused. As if they had both been carrying the same quiet question for months without realizing someone else shared it. Nolan spread his hands. Restaurant hours fluctuate. Credit card adjustments. Taxes. That's normal. It could be, Mateo agreed. His calm agreement surprised everyone. Even Nolan relaxed slightly. Then Mateo continued. Which is why records matter. He looked toward me again. Emily. Yes, sir. You've worked here how long? Almost 3 years. You remember your shifts? I almost laughed. I remember everybody's shifts. Without looking? I nodded. Lily always opens Mondays because she takes classes Wednesday mornings. Miguel switches with Carlos every other Saturday so Carlos can visit his granddaughter. Mrs. Henderson only works lunch because she can't drive after dark. The words came naturally. I'd never considered them unusual. Serving people meant learning rhythms. Not just orders. Lives. Mateo watched me for a long moment. Then he asked quietly, and your own? I've never missed a Friday closing shift. The room fell silent again. His eyes moved to Nolan. Then comparing her scheduled hours with her pay shouldn't take long. The manager's jaw tightened. Those files aren't here. I blinked. They had been. Less than a minute ago. Instinctively, I looked toward the office. The payroll folder I'd noticed on the desk was gone. A faint scrape echoed somewhere beyond the back hallway. Not from the dining room. From inside the office. Someone had just moved something. I wasn't the only one who heard it. Mateo slowly turned his head toward the sound. His expression didn't change. But every one of his men straightened at exactly the same moment. And for the first time that morning, I realized this wasn't simply a conversation anymore. The scrape from the office lasted less than a second. Then everything went quiet again. Too quiet. Mr. Nolan forced a laugh that sounded thinner than before. Old building, he said. The pipes make all kinds of noises. Nobody answered him. Not because we believed him. Because every person in that diner had heard the same sound. A file cabinet drawer. Being shoved closed. Mateo didn't move toward the office. He stayed exactly where he was. Power didn't always chase people. Sometimes it waited for them to make another mistake. Mr. Nolan shifted his weight. As I said, the payroll records aren't here. You just said your accountant handled them, Mateo replied evenly. He does. So when were they removed? I don't remember. Mateo gave the smallest nod. I see. The words should have sounded harmless. Instead, they made my stomach tighten. I looked toward the office door again. The desk was still visible from where I stood. Yesterday, when I dropped off the nightly sales envelope before going home, that payroll folder had been sitting on the corner of the desk beneath a coffee mug with a chipped handle. This morning I'd noticed the same folder. Now only the mug remained. The square of clean wood underneath it was impossible to miss. Something had been there. Now it wasn't. The realization slipped out before I could stop it. It was on the desk. Every head turned toward me. Mr. Nolan's expression hardened instantly. You don't know what you're talking about. I saw it. When? This morning. You've been mistaken before. No. His smile disappeared completely. You were too busy giving away company property to pay attention. The words stung. Not because I believed them. Because I knew everyone else wanted to. A poor waitress made a simpler story than missing payroll records. I drew a slow breath. No. My own voice surprised me. Steadier than I felt. I wasn't carrying food when I saw it. What? I brought your coffee into the office. His forehead creased. You asked for 2 sugars. For the first time since this began, he looked uncertain. I continued before fear could catch me. You were on the phone. You signed yesterday's supplier invoice. You moved the payroll folder so your coffee wouldn't stain it. His mouth opened slightly. I remembered because I remembered everything connected to service. Where people liked their cups. Which hand reached first? Who preferred blue pens? Who always forgot reading glasses? Small things. Invisible things. Mateo watched me without interrupting. So you expect everyone to believe you remember the exact position of one folder? Nolan asked. No. I remember where I set the coffee. I pointed toward the desk inside the office. Right there. The folder was underneath your mug. A hush spread through the diner. Miguel slowly looked toward the office. So. If the mug's still there. Lily finished the thought. Then only the folder moved. Nobody had accused anyone. Not yet. But the room had started asking the same question. Mr. Nolan straightened his tie. Even if that's true, payroll records are moved all the time. By whom? Mateo asked. Our accountant. When? This morning. What time? He hesitated. Barely. But after everything that had happened, hesitation had become louder than shouting. I don't recall. Mateo folded his hands. You seem to have difficulty recalling the moments that matter. A muscle jumped in Nolan's jaw. I run a restaurant. I don't memorize every detail. I've noticed. The sentence landed with quiet precision. I realized then that Mateo hadn't been testing my memory. He'd been comparing it with Mr. Nolan's. One of us remembered ordinary moments because we lived them honestly. The other seemed unable to remember anything that could be checked. Nolan suddenly looked at me instead of Mateo. This is ridiculous. His voice sharpened. She's manipulating everyone. He swept one hand toward me. She's always been emotional. I never said you stole from payroll. The words left my mouth before I planned them. His face froze. For one heartbeat, nobody breathed. Then I heard my own sentence again. I had never accused him of stealing. I'd only said the folder had disappeared. Yet somehow. He'd answered a question no one had asked. Mateo's eyes lifted slowly to meet his. Not angry. Not surprised. Certain. Interesting, he said quietly. The room felt smaller. Even the rain outside seemed to stop against the windows. Mr. Nolan realized it at the exact same moment I did. He had defended himself against an accusation that hadn't existed. Mateo stood. For the first time since entering the diner, he gave one of his men a silent nod. The man walked calmly toward the office. No one tried to stop him. No one dared. And Mr. Nolan whispered, almost too softly for anyone to hear, "You can't open that cabinet." The words came out of Mr. Nolan like a confession trying to disguise itself as an order. You can't open that cabinet. No one moved for half a second. Then Mateo's man looked back at him, waiting. Mr. Nolan stepped forward. Those are private business records. Mateo didn't raise his voice. Then you should have kept them clean. The man opened the office door the rest of the way. A file cabinet stood behind the desk, half blocked by a rolling chair. The top drawer was slightly crooked, as if someone had shoved it closed too fast. The same chipped coffee mug sat on the desk, ringed by a pale square where the folder had been. I heard my own heartbeat. Not because I wanted revenge. Because part of me was still terrified that I was wrong. If I was wrong, I wasn't just losing a job. I was losing the last thin piece of proof that I was not the kind of woman people said I was when they needed someone to blame. Mateo looked at me once. Not with pity. With permission to stand where I was. His man pulled open the drawer. Mr. Nolan lunged. Not far. Not enough. Two of Mateo's men stepped in front of him so smoothly that it almost looked rehearsed. No weapons. No shouting. Just bodies becoming a wall. Careful, Mateo said. One word. The manager stopped. The payroll folder was inside the drawer. Blue tab. Bent corner. The same one I'd seen beneath his coffee mug. Mateo's man placed it on the counter. Nobody touched it for a moment. It sat there between the sugar shakers and the pie display like something alive. Mateo opened it. Pages shifted under his hand. Schedules. Pay stubs. Tip reports. The diner was so quiet I could hear the register printer click once and settle. Mateo turned one page. Then another. His expression didn't change, but the air around him did. Colder. Emily, he said, how many hours did you work last Friday? I swallowed. 11.5. Nolan snapped, she can't possibly remember every hour. 11.5, I repeated. I opened at noon because Lily had class, covered the dinner rush, and closed because Carlos called out. Lily nodded. That's true. Miguel added quietly, I remember. She cleaned my section too. Mateo slid the page toward me. My name was there. 8 hours. Not 11.5. My throat tightened. He turned another page. Miguel. Miguel walked closer, wiping his hands on his apron even though they were already clean. Last Saturday? 12 hours, he said after a moment. Maybe a little more. The record said 9. Lily's face went pale when Mateo showed her Monday's sheet. 4 hours missing. One by one, the pattern came out. Not dramatic. Not complicated. Just small thefts hiding inside exhausted lives. $20 here. 30 there. Enough that desperate people blamed themselves. Enough that no single mistake looked worth fighting. Mateo set the papers down. Then he looked at the manager. You stole from people who were too tired to question you. Nolan's face turned red. That's not stealing. Those are adjustments. Cash tips, meal deductions, scheduling errors, meal deductions? Mateo asked. His hand moved to the inside pocket of his coat. The receipt appeared again. My receipt. The blue ink seemed brighter under the fluorescent lights. Already paid. Enjoy your meal. You tried to call her a thief for a meal she bought with her own money. Nolan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Mateo continued, each word quiet enough that everyone had to listen. You used hunger as evidence against her. My eyes burned. I looked down fast, but not before Lily saw. She reached for my hand under the counter and squeezed once. Mateo closed the folder. Call the owners. Nolan stiffened. And a labor attorney. The diner seemed to inhale. And the police. That was when Nolan finally broke. It was temporary, he said quickly. The restaurant was short. I was going to fix it. No, Mateo said. You were going to fire her before payday and make your shortage her shame. The truth landed harder than a slap. Customers stared. Employees stood frozen. The story everyone had almost believed had turned itself inside out. Mateo looked toward his men. Escort him out. He doesn't touch another file. Nolan's keys were taken from his hand. His office access card was removed from his pocket. The payroll folder was photographed, copied, and sealed in a large envelope Mateo's lawyer produced from a leather case as if he had expected lies before breakfast. Lily whispered my name. When I looked up, she was crying. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have said something sooner." Miguel took off his cap. "We all should have." I didn't know what to do with their apologies. For so long, I had learned to survive without them. Mateo turned to the room. "This woman's record will be corrected today. Every missing dollar will be counted. Every employee here will be paid what they're owed." Then his gaze settled on me. Not possessive. Not soft. Respectful. No one loses their dignity for doing the right thing. And for the first time since I had handed his mother that bowl of soup, I finally understood. He hadn't come to buy my kindness. He had come to make sure the world didn't punish me for it. 3 weeks later, the diner smelled the way it always had. Fresh coffee. Butter on hot biscuits. Soup simmering quietly behind the kitchen doors. Some things never changed. Others changed forever. The first Friday after everything happened, every employee gathered before opening. The owners handed each of us an envelope. Inside mine was every dollar that had been missing from my paychecks. Not a gift. Not charity. Money I had already earned. I cried anyway. Ben squeezed my shoulder that evening when I paid for his insulin without checking my bank balance first. "You look lighter," he said. "I think," I answered with a smile, "I'm finally tired for the right reasons." The diner felt different after that. People laughed more. Lily stopped apologizing every time she asked for help. Miguel whistled while he cleaned the grill. Customers noticed. They tipped better. Not because they pitied us. Because they trusted us. The biggest surprise came every Tuesday afternoon. An elderly woman would quietly walk through the front door wearing the same gray coat. She always ordered the chicken soup. She always asked to sit in my section. One afternoon, after the lunch rush ended, she looked up from her bowl and smiled. "Sit with me." I hesitated. "I should be working." "You've already done enough serving for one lifetime." So I sat. Not across a line that shouldn't be crossed. Just beside someone who had become unexpectedly important to me. A second bowl arrived a moment later. I hadn't ordered it. Neither had she. When I looked toward the counter, Mateo was standing there with his coat folded over one arm. No bodyguards inside. No dramatic entrance. Just a quiet nod before he turned to leave. "I didn't thank you properly," I called after him. He stopped. "Without looking back," he said, "you already did." I frowned. "How?" "You reminded my mother that kindness still lives in this neighborhood." He finally turned. "And you reminded me what power is supposed to protect." There wasn't a grand declaration. No promise. No attempt to place me in his world. Just mutual respect that had been earned one honest choice at a time. After he left, his mother reached into her purse and unfolded something she had carried every week since the night we met. The receipt. The blue ink had faded a little. "Already paid. Enjoy your meal." She smiled as she smoothed its creases. "Some people keep photographs," she said softly. I kept proof that goodness still exists. I looked around the diner. At the laughter. At my coworkers. At the paycheck that had finally been made right. At the bowl of soup growing cold between us because, for once, I wasn't rushing to the next table. For years, I'd believed kindness was something the world punished. I was wrong. Sometimes kindness simply takes the long way home.